Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'll look to call this meeting to order. As we normally proceed with our meetings, we'll begin with the land acknowledgement. The City of London is situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron. We honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. The City of London is currently home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people today. As representatives of the people of the City of London, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats of communication supports for meetings upon request. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact cwc@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Please check the city website for additional meeting detail information. Meetings can be viewed via live stream on YouTube and the city website. I'll look to the committee for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, seeing none. We'll move to item 2, which is an update on the Blue Box transition. What I'll do is I'll ask Mr. Stanford for an update based on the report in front of us. Then I'll look for a mover and a seconder, and then we'll take questions. Mr. Stanford.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I believe there are a few city staff online as well today. And thank you for arranging this special meeting. This is really the continuation of our discussion on Blue Box transition. We were last before you in January, and at that time we were getting ready to move into sort of the final stages of negotiation with our producer responsibility organization. All those details have gone forward, and we're at a point now, and before you today, where we've reached a point where negotiations have gone very well, and we're moving into the final stages. And the final stages require a number of agreements to be signed in a very short period of time. This was known to us, but when we were dealing with one organization, Circular Materials Ontario, they asked that we could do whatever we could to expedite the process. They, in fact, would like some agreements signed by April 30th. We pushed back a little and said early May would probably be more appropriate. We wanted to get before Civic Works Committee with at least 2 of the items, and that is why we're here with you today. Just as a bit of a refresher, the current recycling model is one where the costs are split between industry and municipal taxpayers, about a 50-50 split, and it's been that way for at least 10 years. The new model will see industry paying for almost all costs. I would say between 90 and 95% of recycling costs will be picked up by industry. They will also be the administrator of the program. That will occur after the Blue Box transition program ends, which is January 1st, 2026. During that 2.5-year period, though, is where we'll be working very closely with industry through an agreement, actually a couple agreements, on how the collection service is maintained at the curb and within the apartment sector. And the goal there, of course, is to have seamless transition. So the city is going to be asked to and be paid for the collection service and working with our contractor, Miller Waste Services. The public education promotion system will still be the one that you've seen today. And if anything, it'll be actually enhanced a little bit with payments from industry. And our Enviro depots, where material is dropped off right now, that will continue during the 2.5-year period. So the report before you today talks about 2 agreements that we wish to push forward at this stage. That deals with the system I just described right now, collection, education, promotion, and the Enviro depots, as well as with the recycling center. This is something that has been in place in London since 2011. We've had very good use of that facility, not only from London's perspective, but the regional or municipalities within our region have also been sending recyclable materials there. So it's a facility that handles about 35,000 tons of materials. And this producer responsibility organization called Circular Materials Ontario, CMO for short, wishes to negotiate a contract directly with our service provider, Miller Waste Systems. And this is actually quite good news, because that means that particular facility will be used as part of the future system. That asset will be put to good use, and it'll be an asset that we actually earn a revenue off of. There will be leasing of that particular facility, and that will go through Corporate Services Committee, hopefully within the next meeting, which could be as early as next week. And what is before you today is request for delegated authority to negotiate an agreement to sell the equipment that is within that facility. And that would be sold based on fair market value, and some of that work has been done already, and that will conclude in the next 1 to 2 weeks. That release of the equipment to Miller Waste Systems is very valuable to the city. It ensures that equipment has continued use for the next at least 2.5 years, but at the same time, as Miller expands that facility, brings in more recyclable materials, and in fact increases the job market, because they'll be growing that facility, newer equipment will come into that facility. And the best way for that to be done is for the city to actually step aside and let the private sector actually make all those upgrades, working directly with Circular Materials Ontario, who have responsibility for recycling all these materials. So, Madam Chair, I will end, I think, at that point and take any questions. We've been working collectively on this probably for about 10 years, and it's wonderful that we're seeing that over the next 70 days, London, along with the City of Ottawa and the City of Toronto, and probably 80 smaller municipalities will all be part of that transition. But the big three, Ottawa, Toronto, and London, are all sitting quite comfortably right now. Toronto has completed all their negotiations, and Ottawa and London are at a similar stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we entertain questions, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. I have Councillor McAllister and Councillor Cuddy. Thank you for that. So this is on the recommendation for the proposed bylaw Appendix A and B, as well as a report back. And now we'll look to questions. Councillor McAllister, then Councillor Cuddy, and then Councillor Chasso.
Thank you. Through the chair. Stanford, you mentioned in terms of servicing that it might be enhanced. I was also wondering in terms of scheduling, do we anticipate any disruptions in terms of the scheduling, or are they going to maintain as it is now? Thank you.
Through the chair, starting July 1st, the goal is for this to be completely seamless for the residents of London. It is all the work behind the scenes that we've been talking about that will be key and will carry on. The service itself will continue through on the current schedule, but in our conversation with CMO, we wish to further negotiate how increased services can be provided in the way of collection frequency, where it would be matching the future green bin system, which would be closer to a weekly service. And that is what we hope to have also a part of the negotiation, and CMO has agreed to receive information from the city on those matters.
Follow-up, Councillor? Nope, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Cuddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I'm a huge advocate of outsourcing to the private sector. This is to staff, to Mr. Stafford. And I'm so glad to hear that we're doing that. We're doing more of it. I'm also glad that we have a physical asset that we can actually make money from. So this is really good news. I was going to ask the question, Mr. Stafford, whether or not the equipment that was purchased by the city in 2011 was obsolete, and I'm guessing this equipment changes generationally, so it's probably almost at the end of its life cycle right now. But you feel we're getting fair market value for what we're selling to Miller at this time? Thank you.
Mr. Sanford.
Through the chair, that has always been the sort of the premise of our discussions, working with finance and procurement and entering the initial discussions to be completed. You were quite correct. The equipment, some of it is still functioning, and that is what Miller will use over the transition period. There are a couple pieces that are approaching obsolescence, in part because recycling systems do change. That equipment is approaching 12 years old. And Miller, who has been the operator and in fact was the designer of the facility, the equipment comes in from Quebec. They will do their best to make sure they optimize that. It's one of the things that the private sector does very well, and they will use that in their negotiations with CMO to make sure that let's face it, industry will be paying, but industry wants the best possible price as well too. So it's in everyone's best interest to have the lowest possible cost, and working with an existing facility that has been well-run over all these years will be very advantageous, not only to London, but also to surrounding municipalities.
Councillor follow-up?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stafford, and thank you for your department for this work. I think this is tremendous. This is exactly where we want to go with this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chassa.
I'm probably less excited about contracting out to the private sector than my colleague, but I think in this situation, this seems to be a good plan, and I'm not sure we have a lot of choice, and this is the way we're going to proceed. One concern I do have, though, is making sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation down the line where we have collections on different days. And if I understood what you just said, this is still subject to negotiation with the private vendor?
Thank you to Mr. Sanford.
Through the chair, in this case, we're negotiating with Circular Materials Ontario. They're familiar with our schedule right now. So it'll be part of the negotiation. We'll be bringing back information in that regard. What is important to note is that when the arrangement was signed with the provincial government, it was based on services that were in place 2 years ago. So this is why it'll be through careful conversation, negotiation with CMO that we believe it's advantageous for additional frequency to be provided here in London. The question will be who pays for that, and that will be the subject of our negotiation over the next couple of weeks to complete.
Thank you. Councillor?
Yes, again, through the chair. Well, I just think it would not be a good situation if we find that we're having weekly trash pickup, bi-weekly trash pickup, and correct me, weekly green bin pickup, and sort of different days for the blue box. So I really hope that those negotiations are pressed very aggressively, and that the result of those negotiations does not eat into the surplus that you anticipate.
Thank you. Any further comment, Mr. Stanford?
Through the chair, thank you, and duly noted. And these are some of the conversations we've already entered into right now, and we're looking forward to completing those with those ideas in mind.
Okay, and finally, through the chair, my last question is the good news here is that there is going to be a surplus, and that we are going to save. We anticipate that we're going to save money. I'm not sure when those savings are going to exactly kick in, and we don't know how long they're going to be, but we do anticipate that there are going to be savings, if I understand your report. So my question is, do we anticipate enjoying any of these savings during the current budget cycle, being 2024 to 2027, that we're now planning for?
Thank you to staff.
Through the chair, since we've been at this for a while, we've been sort of looking not only at 2023, but have had an early peek at what's going to look like for 2024, the multi-year budget. So the short answer is for 2023, as a reminder, 1.5 million has already been assumed to come into the system based on successful negotiations. So we've already gone forward knowing what is likely to come forward from industry based on the information we had at that time, and that would have been back in late last year, early January. So we are very comfortable with the 1.5 million coming in for this year. As far as future years, it would be, we believe, upwards of $4 million less the 1.5 million that has already been entered into our budget as additional revenue. So there will be, we're not really calling it surplus right now, we're just calling it additional revenue that will be made available for the multi-year budget, and this will be known further within a couple months, and of course we'll enter the multi-year budget discussions.
Thank you. Follow-up, Councillor?
Yes, very briefly, through the chair. Well, this is great news, and I have every confidence that you're going to be great negotiators, and you're going to increase our surplus. How are we going to determine, how are we as the city going to determine where this surplus goes? Does it go without saying that it just goes into the general fund, or are there other possibilities for us to earmark this savings for related environmental projects?
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Stanford, but that might be more of a question during our multi-year budget conversations. But I'll see if Mr. Stanford wants to comment.
Through the chair, and I'm not exactly sure who's online, so someone may wish to pipe in after to help me out on this one. But with respect to the operating costs, that would be basically come into our particular budget as additional revenue. And when I say ours, the recycling budget within waste management, those additional savings brought forward as part of the operating discussion through multi-year budget. So that money is not spent, but the allocation comes back into our budget. Where it differs is on sort of the capital. So when we sell the equipment, for example, that will come back through, it's really a disposal of asset, and there are some financial policies that are already available that would be brought forward to you at that point in time on how that money is allocated. Some of that, for example, might go back to the reserve fund because we will be still having the facility in place through the lease arrangement as well. So there's going to be sort of a couple decisions that have to be made, but at the end of the day, that will be, of course, following existing policies. And then if there are policy not in place, one would be recommended by staff for committee and council to decide.
Thank you, and I'll just check in to see if Mr. Collins has anything further to add.
Through the chair to committee, nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor, any further questions?
No, thank you very much. I'll take this up at a future time. I think it's premature to make plans for how we're going to divvy up the money. So more on this later.
Thank you. I'll just check in with Councillor Van Meerbergen to see if he had any questions, then I'll go to our visiting councillor. Councillor Van Meerbergen, if you have a question, you can hit *6 to unmute.
Thank you, Chair. You can hear me, I presume?
Yes, we can hear you.
So just as a quick comment, I think this is great. Excellent work by Mr. Stanford and staff. It's been going on, as Mr. Stanford said, for years. And this is the fruits of the labor. And just to follow up on Councillor Troso, I think there's absolutely no question that any excess surplus would either go to tax savings or roads. So I just put that in Councillor Troso's ear, and we can look forward to some budget discussions as they come forward. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment. I will go to, we have a speakers list, so I'll go to Councillor Prival next, and then we'll look to potentially call the question if there's nothing else. Go ahead, Councillor Prival.
Thank you, sir. Chair to the staff. Mr. Stanford, you mentioned that there's already for this year, $1.5 million savings for 2023. A few weeks ago, we finished our update for 2023. Do you know, or if this is a question for the finance, if this 1.5 million has already been reflected in the update we did a few weeks ago, or do you think this is additional savings to the 2023 update we did?
Thank you, Mr. Stanford, or should I go to Mr. Collins?
I'll start if I may.
Thank you.
This was an amount that is already reflected in our budget as part of the update for 2023. So 1.5 million additional revenue starting in the last half of the year has already been added into my budget to help lower its costs as part of the whole discussion that occurred as part of the annual update.
Thank you. Do you have, Mr. Collins, did you have anything to add?
No, through the chair to committee, as part of business case, budget amendment number 1, it was incorporated into part of council's decision. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Prival, anything further?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, any lingering questions from members of committee? Okay, seeing none, I'll look to call the question. And Councillor Van Meerbergen, if you need to vote verbally, please feel free to unmute using *6.
Paul Van Meerbergen votes yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Okay, we have no other scheduled items for direction or deferred matters or additional business because this is a special meeting of CWC. So we will look to adjourn our meeting. I'm looking for a mover, and thank you, Councillor Cuddy. Thank you, Councillor McAllister for second, and by hand. And Paul, if you want to vote verbally, feel free.
Yep. I'll vote yes.
Thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.